Shields up, Ironbreakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about Elden Ring. Before we begin, though, it is important to mention that recently I've been getting hit pretty hard by the YouTube algorithm, and as such, the videos aren't really showing up in subscriber feeds, recommended, or any of the other places where videos usually flourish in. If you guys would like to help out with that, if you watch this video and you do enjoy it, do hit the like button. If you watch it and don't enjoy it, hit the dislike button because it also helps and feedback is important. Leaving a comment also helps out immensely, so thank you for taking the time to do that. Otherwise, one of these days, there might just not be a Rurikhan YouTube channel. Anyway, let's get back on topic. Elden Ring. We had known about this game for quite some time, not under the name Elden Ring. Most people were referring to it as Great Rune, and we knew that it was going to be a collaboration between Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin. Now, I didn't really report on this because it was leaks, and I personally don't like reporting on leaks, and I also feel that it really took away from the initial reveal of the game, where I think a lot of people's minds would have been blown if they were to see, oh my god, Miyazaki is working with George R.R. Martin for the very first time with a trailer reveal. I think that would have been friggin' amazing. This way it was more like, oh yeah, it's that thing that people have been talking about. We were all expecting this to come out sooner or later, and now here it is. But anyway, I'm pretty sure that the question on a lot of people's minds is going to be the release date for Elden Ring, because we don't have a date. Hell, we don't even have a year. So I did a little bit of digging into it, and it turns out the development of this game began after the conclusion of the Ringed City DLC for Dark Souls 3, which was released on March 27th, 2017. So I would wager that the development of this game began on March 2017, not necessarily 27th, maybe a little bit earlier, but it doesn't really matter. March 2017. And then we take a look at Sekiro, which began development after the Old Hunters DLC for Bloodborne, which would put it at around November 2015. If we look at the fact that Sekiro released on March 22nd this year, that would give it 3 years and change of development time. We then can take a look at the release dates of Dark Souls 2, 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro, and all of these games came out in the month of March. So it would make a lot of sense if Elden Ring would also come out in the month of March. And if we then look at the fact that, well, if they began developing it on March 2017, then March 2020 would give it exactly 3 years, which seems a little bit short, but due to the fact that From Software has been getting better and better at utilizing their engine, which they developed for Bloodborne, if you guys remember, I think it is a fair conclusion to reach that potentially this game is going to be releasing on March 2020. Particularly taking the fact that usually From Software announces their titles when they are fairly close to being released, as opposed to announcing them like 2 years in advance. So I would be very surprised if this was not to release in March 2020. But that, again, is just a theory by looking at the stuff that they've done in the past. But that is where I would place my bets if I was a gambling man, which I am not. So let's talk about the game itself, and I'm taking information from an interview conducted by Bandai Namco and posted on the Xbox website, as well as another interview that was conducted by IGN. Elden Ring is going to be a third-person action RPG, and we can see from the trailer that it is clearly going to be inspired by Norse mythology. And I say that because one of the characters in the trailer seems very similar to the depiction of Valkyries in Norse mythology, as well as the blacksmith banging away at an anvil has distinct Viking-like features, as in a braided beard, long blonde hair, and just his body type seems very much in line with what we've come to expect from Vikings. So anyway, here's what Miyazaki had to say. We wanted to create a new dark fantasy action RPG full of things that we weren't able to do in the Dark Souls series. This game is going to focus more on RPG aspects like previous Souls games, as opposed to Sekiro, which was much more focused on the action combat. However, it is still going to have the responsive melee combat that we've come to know and love from Software. It is going to include a wide variety of weapons, magic, and ways to engage enemies, which basically means builds. It is going to support a lot of different builds, which will support a lot of different playstyles. And I know that for a lot of people, that is going to be a relief, because they didn't care for the fact that in Sekiro, you play a katana from beginning to finish. And I understand where that frustration is coming from, because, you know, you've always been able to do builds in From Software games, and Sekiro is a much more directed experience. Me personally, I like both styles. I think there's room in the gaming industry for both styles, you know, having a game that gives you a wide variety of builds for you to work on, and as a matter of fact, I love doing that stuff, as you guys know, and having another game that every now and then just gives you a more linear experience, even though Sekiro is not really linear, but, you know, a more streamlined experience to really focus on certain mechanics, and I think that they've done a fantastic job both ways. it is important to mention, I guess, at this point, I should have mentioned this earlier in the video even, but I'm extremely biased towards Souls games, in case you guys weren't aware. Like, it's even in the channel trailer. Like, I love Japanese action RPGs, particularly the brand of From Software, as well as Monster Hunter and that kind of stuff. So I'm very biased about this particular subject matter. Anyway, another thing that Miyazaki said is, even when compared to the Dark Souls series, I believe this title will provide even more variety in the ways for players to overcome challenges and tweak their tactics when facing enemies. And one key aspect that I want to bring here is tweak their tactics when facing enemies. So that, maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into that particular sentence, or maybe just the way that they translate it or whatever. But like, when you're talking about tweaking your tactics, you're talking to me about changing your tactics. And a lot of times when you get into a build, like say, oh, you're doing a strength build, then you're going to be carrying a big meaty weapon and you're going to be hitting your enemies with it, right? Whereas if you're tweaking your tactics, maybe you can change your build around somehow. Maybe builds will be a little bit more dynamic rather than they were in the previous Souls games, where it's like, oh, you put your points into strength. Well, now it's going to be a bit of a hassle if you need to respec, which Dark Souls 3, you had like 5 respecs for playthrough, if I remember correctly. And I honestly don't remember how you could respec in Dark Souls 2. It's been a long, long time. And you can't respec at all in Dark Souls 1. There was also... Were there ways to respec? No, you couldn't respec at all in Bloodborne either. So yeah, hopefully they'll introduce some form of respec in there so that you can like tweak your stuff and you're not really like completely tied down to a build from beginning to end. Particularly because, you know, sometimes near the end you find a weapon and you're like, dude, I totally want to make a build just around this weapon. So if they can, you know, look at that aspect of it and really allow players to customize their characters without having to go through the entire game every single time you want to work on your build, that'd be great. So, Miyazaki, please. But anyway, they also mentioned with a more open and vast environment, the way combat plays out becomes fundamentally different when talking in reference to previous Soulsborne games. So this is interesting. They're talking about how the environments are going to be more open, you're going to have a vast environment, and as such, combat is going to play out in different ways. As a matter of fact, the environments themselves are going to be so vast because this is going to be an open world type game. We're going to get into more detail a little bit later in the video when talking about that. You're actually going to be riding a horse. This is going to be the first time, I think, that you're riding a horse in a From Software game, which sounds like a very interesting challenge for them to actually tackle, even though it's not going to be a traditional open world. More on that. Then, when Miyazaki was asked about how challenging the game was going to be, he had this to say. The importance we place on the joy the player experiences through overcoming challenges will be the same as it is in our other titles. I believe it will prove to be a very satisfying experience. And you hear that? That is the world's smallest violin right now playing for every single member of mainstream media press that struggles with Souls games. My difficulty, respect me! And Miyazaki says, no, dude, I'm gonna keep appealing to my core audience and you can go cry in a corner if you want to, okay? That's how we all feel about all of you news reporters out there. There's like, Dark Souls is too hard, it needs an easy mode. Anyway, in Elden Ring, you are not going to have a fixed protagonist. Instead, you're going to be creating your character just like in previous Soulsborne games. So if you thought that this was going to be like Sekiro, they're going to put a character in there and you're playing as a character. No, you're going to be creating your character. Most likely that means silent protagonist, though. I don't know. They have not confirmed this particular bit. Although I have to say, I like the fact that Sekiro actually spoke. I thought that was a cool thing, and I would really like to see voice protagonist in Elden Ring, because I personally just prefer voice protagonist. That is a personal preference, but I highly doubt that is going to be the case. Every time you've had like a character that you actually customize, he's been pretty much a silent protagonist. Let's hope they would break that mold, but again, I highly doubt it. Like I mentioned previously, this title is going to be From Software's interpretation of an open world game. There are, however, no bustling towns filling to the brim with NPCs to interact with. You're just going to encounter other characters in ruins and such, kind of like what we had for previous games, you know, places that look kind of like Firelink Shrine, and you'll encounter a couple of characters here and there, or maybe even just encounter them before a boss, and maybe they can help you out, or you'll just encounter them out in the world. But you are not not going to have like, hey, here's this town, here's this NPC, here's your shop, here's your crafting. That stuff is not happening. They want to focus on their core experience, the stuff that they're really good at, as opposed on focusing on learning about towns and whatnot. I think they're probably going to face a pretty interesting challenge already with the horseback riding and all of that stuff, because that is the first time that they are doing this. In a lot of ways, if you look back on From Software's development, the way that they develop games is actually very, very interesting. It's almost like they're continuously exploring this one mechanic, and then they learn from that mechanic, and they move on to their next game, and they're like, okay, so we learned that. How can we kind of bring that in here without necessarily copying it over? And now they're learning horseback riding and open worlds. Maybe at some point in the future, you will have, in a future game, you will have like a bustling city with NPCs to interact with. And it would definitely be interesting to see Miyazaki's take on that. But anyway, another thing that Miyazaki has said is creating a new type of game is a big challenge for us. If we would add towns on top of that, it would become a bit too much. So we decided to create an open world style game focused on what we are best at. The scale of the world and its narrative, as well as the depth and freedom of exploration, have increased dramatically. It is without a doubt our biggest title yet in terms of sheer volume. And I know a lot of people are going to be super excited. It's the biggest From Software game ever made. And in a lot of ways, I'm excited too. In other ways, I'm getting reminded of Dark Souls 2. Because here's the thing. Size for size's sake is a bad thing. And that was one of the biggest problems about Dark Souls 2. It was too damn big. Like, it was so big that I think I was about 60 or 70% into the game on my very first playthrough, and I was ready for it to end. I'm like, oh, surely this is one of the last fights, right? And then they're like, no, here's this massive area in front of you, and another massive, and another. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And the problem is that a lot of those levels were also extremely linear, as opposed to being the properly cool designed levels that we had seen in Dark Souls 1, and then we turned up and seeing again in Dark Souls 3, and Bloodborne, and all of that stuff. So, like, having it being the biggest game that From Software has ever done, that's all good and great, so long as it's not just like empty space. You know, if you're just going to give me a world that is giant but doesn't have as much meaning, that's not something that I particularly care for. So I am a little bit concerned about that, but I'm pretty sure that they've learned a lot of lessons with Dark Souls 2 and that they would not repeat those same mistakes. Apparently the theme of this game is going to be the will or ambition of mankind, and when asked about the definition of Elden Ring, Miyazaki said, Elden Ring is the name given to a mysterious concept that defines the world itself. So we're not talking about an actual physical item. We're not talking about a ring. We're talking about a concept. The Elden Ring is a concept. As the trailer at the conference implied, this Elden Ring has been shattered. The significance of this is going to be one of the important themes of the game. Now, my personal belief is that they are going to tie the shattering of the concept of the Elden Ring with the creation of different realms, kind of like the realms in Norse mythology. Now, I don't think that means you're going to be traveling to Niflheim or Muspelheim or any of those places. I think they're going to create their own mythos and lore. It's not going to just be copy pasta from Norse mythology, but I do believe that the shattering of the Elden Ring is what is going to bring about all of these new realms. But this is all speculation, and I don't actually know if that is going to be the case at all. I just think that now is one of the more fun times to create videos about a From Software game, is when you still don't know all that much about it, and there's all these wild theories going out there, and I just find that to be an interesting aspect of it. So I just had to throw my hat in the ring. Anyway, a lot of you guys might be wondering, so what does George R.R. Martin have to do with any of this? Because I haven't talked about him other than to say that he's involved in the project. Well, essentially, it turns out that Miyazaki is a massive fan of George R.R. Martin's books. His favorite book is a book called Father Dream. Now, I personally don't read all that much nowadays. Back when I did read a whole lot, my favorite author was actually Bernard Cornwell. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. It's just to say that I don't know Father Dream. I don't know Song of Ice and Fire beyond the show Game of Thrones. But apparently Miyazaki friggin' loves this guy's books. So From Software's business director reached out to George R. R. Martin. He was expecting to actually get shot down, but it wasn't the case. George R. R. Martin actually wanted to meet up and see what Miyazaki wanted to talk about. And in the grand scheme of things, what ended up happening is George R. R. Martin did all of the lore and mythos of the world in which Elden Ring takes place. And then Miyazaki did the story itself. So that gave Miyazaki a lot of things to draw from in terms of lore and mythos and stuff like that. And it's probably going to be present heavily in a lot of the item descriptions of the game. That is at least what I would predict. Because again, like all of the backstory of this world, all of the, really important characters and all of that stuff was defined by George R. R. Martin. But then the story and the characters that you're going to be interacting with, all of that is Miyazaki. And according to Miyazaki, that collaboration was also very interesting, extremely inspiring, and it really made for what he considers to be a better game. So I'm curious to see what all of that is going to be like, and I'm sure that you guys are all curious to see. I'm actually very curious to know, and I've said curious about 5 times now, what your opinions are on all of this. So get into that comment section, get to typing, and let me know if I missed anything in regards to the trailer or the stuff that has been coming out at this point. Just let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you all very much for watching the video. If you enjoy my content, remember, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, all of that good stuff. Stay strong, and may your shields never break.